Good evening, everybody. It's a greatest opportunity to hear from the expert. So, today, speaker is Ararat, and it's our wonderful opportunity to hear from his expertise. He is expert on current Middle East policy and on emerging the multilateral world. He has written several articles such as The Syrian Crisis, Al-Qaeda's Ideology, The Rise of the Multilateral World and Fading US Hegemony, China's Rise, Turkey's Ottoman Ambitions, US Foreign Policy, etc. He has participated in international academic conferences in Armenia, China, and Nepal, lectured on the Syrian crisis at IAIS Malaysia. Ararat Kostanian, he is a junior fellow in the Institute of Oriental Studies, National Academy of Science in Armenia. So today's particular topic is very important and very emerging topic in today's scenario, the Syrian crisis that turned into a war. So let's not waste time. It's an opportunity, Ararat, to have you as a speaker, eminent speaker for the platform for dialogue for today's particular webinar. And now I am hand over the session to you. I welcome you for today's.
Hello.
Yes. Would you like
Yes.
to present? Would you like to present your presentation? So you just click on the present now button.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. The last sentence, could you repeat again?
Yeah. Could you able to see the present now button in your screen?
No. Yes.
Yes. Then you can able to share your screen, your presentation.
Yes.
It's not coming.
I don't know why there is no sign on the share.
No, click
box.
on present now. Click on present now.
I did already.
Present now, then a window.
Yes.
If you click on a window, you can able to see your PPT.
Uh-huh.
Can you able to see your PPT?
A window. Yes.
Can you able to see your PPT now?
Yes.
Yeah, click on the PPT.
All right.
Yes. Then share.
Can we start?
Yes, please start.
Okay, I will start with a brief introduction about why I wanted and I found that it is important to talk about what happened in Syria a few years back when the crisis started, when it turned into a war. I realized that in Asia, in that part of the world, when I did lecture in Malaysia, I found that people, although they are interested about the Middle East, about the Islamic world, about the Arab world, but many people, even experts, they don't have deep understanding of what happened in Syria in reality, because everybody knew that in Syria in the last 40 years nearly, it was very stable situation under the presidency of Hafez al-Assad. And even in Syria, even Syrians, if you ask them today, they will be very surprised at how all this happened in very quick, very fast transformation from very stable country to nearly, I don't call it a civil war, I call it imposed war on Syria. Of course, all this started during the famous incident that we know as the Arab Spring. It's really interesting that we still don't know who has labeled these demonstrations in the Arab world when it started from Tunisia, from immolation of a person. He was very sad and angry from the police treatment to him when he was selling his products on the streets, which was labeled as an illegal. And just from that immolation, all these demonstrations, all these young movements and some intellectual movements started to pour on the street and demand regime change, demand of end of authoritarian regimes in Arab world, and all this had a domino effect. Very quickly, it moved to Egypt and until reached to Syria. But because today we are focusing on only Syrian crisis and Syrian issue, I will not go deep to the Arab Spring incidents because we already know. But at the same time, I have to mention that not every country had the same situation, and of course not in every country had much similarities. But what happened, I label it again, I'm saying that it was a strategic imposed war on Syria. But how that happened, some people will argue, well, the people who started to demonstrate against the government, against the regime, that they had been all these years lack of freedom, lack of political engagement, lack of civil society enrollments, etc., etc. Of course, I wouldn't say that all have been planned, but when we focus on Gandhi's revolutionary plan in starting a battle or a revolt against a regime, although it was against the British Empire, but it was the idea of starting a movement, a non-violent movement. After what have Gandhi's legacy, I've read Gene Sharp's book, which is, interestingly, it was not focused on the Arab Spring. It was written long before, but its aim was to start these non-violent actions in Eastern Europe, in Latin America, even in China. But I believe that there are two factors actually, academically or strategically, what brought to this our current situation. First, we must know that for many years, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union, after the US won the Cold War, they saw that they have the power and they have the possibility to spread this liberal and neoliberal ideology, especially in Eastern Europe and in Middle East. And we know that one of the key architectures of this ideology was Fukuyama when he wrote the famous book, The End of History. If we take back and read this book, if we look from the view back to the time when he wrote this book, it's very exciting, it's very colorful that all the world will be under the liberal scheme, will be developed, will be one world, will be one language, will be new world order, and everybody will live peacefully and everybody will start to develop themselves, and it's became to be very colorful scheme. And many people believed in that, especially in Eastern Europe and especially in the Middle East, because some people were fed up from these authoritarian regimes that they cannot bring new things, they cannot bring change, etc., etc. So these two roads brought to Arab Spring, and that's brought in what happened in Syria. But before that, I want to go back. What happened before the crisis in Syria? What was inside Syria happening, and the changes that were happening? Because when you want to study a country or a region, when this revolutionary wave is coming, sometimes you realize that the country you are talking about was at the level of developing, although it had circumstances that some people were not happy. Actually, you never will have a population that will be 100% happy in any country. But what was Gene Sharp is doing? Gene Sharp's aim, that he wrote this grand strategy of nonviolent movements, and the book is called From Dictatorship to Democracy. Actually, this strategy aims points the weaknesses of any regime or any authoritarian or any government. So what was in Arabic world in general and precisely in Syria, that they labeled it authoritarian regimes. They have been, when I say they, I mean the West, and especially Great Britain and United States. They have been publishing for many years books against Assad's regime. They were labeling him authoritarian. Some people were labeling him a dictator, as George W. Bush labeled Syria in the axis of evil countries, and etc., etc. So nothing happens out of a sudden. The propaganda, the academic propaganda is there. The strategy is there, written by Sharp and others. And what comes here, the function, when social media and the media such as Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya, they have been working for many years to prepare what happened in Syria. Now, I will go back what I have said, that what Bashar al-Assad brought in Syria. But what was his success? That he started to open up the economy. He started to open up the educational system. We should admit that these changes were not very easy to implement, because when you come to power, although your father had been the president, but when you come to bring changes, that is, I believe that it have been big achievements, what have been done, such as private banks started to function in Syria, which haven't been before. Tourism started greatly to develop, and many people from Arabic countries, especially from Gulf, started with big numbers to visit Syria, especially the seashore. Europeans started with big interest to come to Syria and visit the historical places. And what brought here in tourism business, that many new hotels and restaurants started to develop, and such areas that I was born, for instance, in Aleppo, the old city where we know, where they were undeveloped houses and streets, but it had more than a few thousand years of history. And these places started to open up as a family business, and it started to be labeled as touristic places, and combining food and beverages business with history. So this area was this field started to develop greatly. And another issue I mentioned, that the economy started to also opening up to even European countries. For instance, France and Germany were doing new projects in Syria. Gulf countries started to do big projects in Syria. For instance, Qatar started to bring forward a great big investment project in the seashore area. So what I want to mention that Syria has been on the stage of development, and it is surprising how come, if we use our logic a bit, we will think that how come a country that even with small steps starting to develop, but suddenly comes the Arab Spring movement, and suddenly that reaches to Syria. This is a question that we have to think about it very clearly and very intentionally, because here is the key issue. Some of them that time didn't realize what's happening. Of course, I understand the euphoria, I understand the excitement were coming from other countries, that the youngsters started to watch on Al Jazeera and Arabia on social media that what was happening in Tunisia, what was happening in Egypt. And of course, I'm not blaming the people who started first to rise up. Yes,
Ararat,
yes.
yeah, I'm sorry
Yes.
to interrupt.
Yes.
Just we can't able to see your presentation. We just only able to see the screen where we are only here there. So it would be wonderful if you just share your presentation.
Yes, 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 yes. Can you see it now?
Yes, it's coming. Yes. Yes, it's perfect. Yeah. So audience would be more interactive because they can
Yes,
able to see it.
yes.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Welcome. So, as I have mentioned, the question I rose that why this incident started when there is a country already developing, although with small steps. We have to, in Middle East, you cannot, our colleague also from Iraq, she would know very well that you cannot look, in Middle East, you cannot, even if you want to study Syria, but you cannot focus on one country, because in Middle East, everything is linked together. The countries are very much linked together. There is the conflict between Sunni and Shia. There is the conflict between the conflict between countries which they are not followed, the policy is not followed by religion. You have the minorities, whether religious, or you have races, and etc., etc. We all aware of this. So what the virus entered in Middle East before the Arab Spring was the US invasion in Iraq. So this was very important issue that started to affect Syria and started to make setbacks in the programs or the economic strategies that President Bashar al-Assad put forward. Because we all know, we should be aware that if there is an invasion in your neighboring country, your economy is much affected, and your economy with Iraq used to be in very active levels. And of course, you have also the danger that a war can be spread to even to Syria, because that time George W. Bush announced in front of the world that our most priority after Iraq invasion will be outthrowing the Syrian regime, and our last target will be attacking Iran. Under these circumstances, of course, in every country, you have to tighten your national security apparatus, and you cannot open up, even though economically, but you cannot give freedoms to NGOs, to other foreign NGOs involvements and doing such seminars and conferences, etc., etc. Even though during Bashar al-Assad period, first period, he was very clear and he started to open up a bit politically in internal affairs when he permitted from the Syrian local organizations to criticize the government in newspapers or on television. All this was happening, but still the West, and especially the United States and the Great Britain and their allies, especially in Gulf, were continuing criticizing Syrian regime as being an authoritarian regime, etc., etc. Another important issue that brought setback in Syria's opening up economically and politically was Lebanon's Prime Minister Rafik Hariri's assassination, and straightforward, the blame was put on the Syrian regime and its allies in Lebanon, precisely Hezbollah. You know, this is also some politically and in a propaganda way, it was well-played scenario, and until now, we don't know who really gave the order to assassinate Rafik al-Hariri. And especially when we look back few months ago, there was a release from the Hague in Europe, international jurisdiction bureau, the court, international court, that Syria and Hezbollah were not involved in the assassination of Rafik al-Hariri. But all these years, from 2005 until now, the blame has been put on the Syrian regime without any evidences and without any clues. And this is another problem, that the Syrian regime was forced to set back from its presence in Lebanon also, because we know that time Syria had their big involvement in Lebanese internal political affairs, and Syrian troops were there long years ago, invited from Lebanese sides to stop the civil war in Lebanon. So these two issues, I will repeat, what happened as an Iraqi invasion by US troops and what happened in Lebanon, these two issues has forced Syria to become well aware of the isolation that is coming close to its borders. And that's why I believe that some of the promises in economy and in political opening up not decreased, but I believe started to take smaller steps. So in reality, people that time, I believe some of people in the society didn't understand these issues. Also, it has been explained and brought some facts that why we are not being able to bring forward some of the promises. But of course, in every country, now if you look around now in Belarus, there are big demonstrations. Even in Western countries at the moment, in France and in England, there are big demonstrations. In US, there are not only demonstrations, but shootings on the streets. But you don't know why nobody blames the Western governments, and only the blame goes to some Arabic countries who are in conflict with the Zionism idea and with Israel. These are the two regional issues that I have talked about. Of course, the big issue goes to global struggle between the U.S. hegemony and U.S. exceptionalism, where have been changed in after Iraqi invasion, because the U.S. thought that invading Afghanistan was very strategic to pressure on on Iran. And another issue, they have invaded Iraq, and they thought that the democracy they have promised will be in great success and in very short time. So during Obama time, this was very clear that even though their troops were in Iraq, even though they have been successful in toppling Saddam Hussein regime, but they haven't achieved total control in Iraq. And I believe that Obama's time, they thought attacking militarily Syria will bring them the same result in Iraq, and they were not. They haven't been ready to invest in military, because that time they were having the financial crisis. So I believe that they have invented this scenario as an Arab Spring, and they wanted to ignite some of the people from the society who are not happy with their governments, and that's by that they could create regime changes, and after that they would bring the powers that they have been interested or they have supported financially. So American exceptionalism started to fade, and that's what many American scholars have been talking about for years, such as Noam Chomsky and others. And multilateral world started to be seen. China's rise, Russia's military rise, and Russia's gas strategy, which meant that the Middle East, this part of the Middle East, was going out of America's and West's control. Syria has been the last bastion, and that's why Russia and China, even that time in UN, they couldn't protect Iraq's regime, but at this time they realized that all their strategy, West's strategy, was clear, and toppling Syria's regime, they would have the chance to lose the Middle East. So this is interesting issue. If you look at Syria, it's a small country if you compare to the other big countries. But what's starting to be interesting here, that the Syrian crisis started to shape the multilateral world that we are talking about now, and that we are doing some conferences and seminars nearly every day. So what is interesting here, that for the first time, Russia and China have put veto against West's demand to stop NATO's intervention in Syria. And we can realize from here that Syria's position was the keystone of what will shape the future of the Middle East. Because, as I told you before, not any country in Middle East is linked with other countries' situation, and it's also inside has many this ethnic and religious diversity. So Syria's conflict and crisis wasn't regional, wasn't Syrian and regional problem per se, but it was also a global problem, global crisis that shaped the world that we are living now today. Another issue that now many people are interested, and some of them in my country, the youngsters who has been interested about this topic, they asked me several times that how come that Syrian regime, Syrian government started to, how the Syrian regime have been able to survive all these years, although we know that nearly 120 countries were against the Syrian government, and they, from all around the world, they came to fight against the government and against the Syrian people. How come that the Syrian government survived all in these years, and not only survived, they are nearly won the war? Of course, now, until now, we have the American troops there, we have the Turkish troops controlling the northern part of Syria and Idlib. Of course, the war is not finished 100%, but I consider it a victory when you liberated the country, 90% or 80% of the country, from the most developed Takfiri Wahhabi terrorist organizational global force. I believe this happened not only with the help of Russia, Iran, and China. Of course, they have, as I've mentioned, on IR, on global policy, of course, they have supported their ally, and could have been without them, could have been Syria has divided to 3 or 4 small countries. But what kept the Syrian people next to the government, this is very important issue, that today, even though some people left their houses, some people left their country, but still, whether they are today in other Arabic countries, whether they are in Europe, whether they are in Canada, whether they are in Sweden, but still, when you talk with the people, the majority supports the Syrian government, because during Hafez al-Assad's power, he has put very strong, very academically well-studied Arab nationalist strategy. When I go back to my school years, I remember that one of the subjects that we have studied in school was about Arab nationalism. So this was not fictive. This was not make-up decorative class. So they knew that if your strategy in the region to fight against Zionism, to fight against the creation of Israel, you cannot do that only by starting wars in every 10 years or 15 years. He understood it very well, that you have to educate your people, you have to educate your new generation when they come to schools, when they come to universities. He gave the people this belief that Arab nationalism is the only cause that we can have our dignity, that we can have our country united, that we can have the right and the ability to bring our lands back that we lost during the previous wars with Israel. Other Arab countries, I believe they haven't continued this ideology, and some of them started to think, okay, we might go to have peace deal with Israel, and I think every country must think of its future and its people, and the Palestinians should continue with the struggle by themselves, or we can support them under the table financially, but we shouldn't support their cause, and we shouldn't link the Palestinian conflict with Arab-Israeli conflict. And it's interesting now when we see the region, what's happening now. The UAE and Bahrain, few weeks ago, they have signed a peace deal with Israel. So I believe that the only country who stayed in this belief of keeping the Arab nationalism alive in Syria, and I believe this is the only reason that today Syrian people and Syria in general didn't have a country partition to to some small countries, as Condoleezza Rice had put that plan, which called the New Middle East. What happened in Iraq, actually, I believe some of them lost this belief that Arab nationalism could survive, although Saddam Hussein was in a strong belief that Arab nationalism could continue. So coming back to Syria, I also want to mention the accusations that were coming also under the label of authoritarian regime, and not only giving freedoms to the people in terms of political participations, but also the Western and their Arab allies, for many decades, they were attacking on this sensitive issue of Sunni-Shia conflict. Actually, I believe that this issue has been from after the death of Prophet Muhammad. We know this story that the line went to Shias, but this issue hasn't been in conflict religiously and even politically. There were some misunderstandings or some arguments, but this issue haven't been in a stance of conflict. And I repeat again, putting this issue in media for many decades, and this what happened started to ignite after the invasion in Iraq. This issue has been another conflict issue in Lebanon also, especially after the assassination of the Sunni leader Rafiq al-Hariri, and we started to see two political branches started to get separated from each other. And every day, if you have been following the programs and the news on Lebanese media, you could have been realizing that the core issue was not on developing how to develop economy, how we can develop the political atmosphere, but it was mutual accusations from Shi's side to Sunnis and from Sunni side to Shi's. And this was actually one of the key reasons that foreign Western countries started to play with the emotions of the people using religious, not conflicts, but some previously dialogues or misunderstanding. In both ways, the West knew how to play with the emotions of the people without bringing their forces on the ground. So if I look from the American or Western side, what they've thought that, okay, if we can find a scenario that these people can fight together, and if we can use their emotions against each other, why we should bring our troops and spend trillions of money, and especially when we have the financial crisis. So another also issue that I don't accept when I read articles, academic articles and books about this lack of freedom in Syria or Middle East in general, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Jordan. I will give you one example that I belong to the Armenian community, and we have our churches, we have our schools. In economy, we have our all rights. We had some of the biggest factories in Syria belong to Armenians. Some of them belongs to my cousins directly, and nobody from government, nobody from the Syrian people, nobody from the Sunni majority had put obstacles against us to grow the business or on churches or on our schools, etc., etc. So again, we are Armenian Christians. We have Christians. We have Orthodox Christians. We have Turkmens. We have Kurds. So all these people, all these years have been peacefully living together. Of course, sometimes some problems could arise, but we never faced any problem that you don't have to follow your religion, why you are Christian, why you are Muslim, why you are Shia, why you are Sunni. I never heard such questions. I had myself Sunni friends. I had myself Kurds friends. I had myself Alawi friends, and our doors were open to each other. They used to come to my house to have lunch and dinner. I used to go to their houses. And what combined us in Syria in general was the idea that we are all Syrian, we are all working for developing Syria, we are all working for keeping Syria united. And suddenly comes this wave. Some people in the villages or in the towns which haven't been the area too much developed, and I understand that because, as I have mentioned before, Bashar al-Assad, when he came to power, he opened up the economy, but his main target first, in the first 10 years, was to bring the bourgeois level, the middle class level, and after that, just when you have the middle class level majority, you can go to underdeveloped areas, to towns and villages. We know that some towns even didn't have electricity, some towns didn't have enough water to develop their agricultural works. We know all that, but the strategy was clear, and some people were not patient, and the foreign forces used these underdeveloped areas people, and of course the Takfiri and Wahhabi ideology also gave them hope that the minority can control Syria, the minority can bring the caliphate back, and the caliphate can unite Iraq and Syria and Jordan, and they could have this wishful thinking life that Syria can be under caliphate period, and they could live their life not only by daily visiting to their mosque and do their prayers, but also they can bring forward the Sharia law, and they could transform Syria into an Islamic country. But this is, of course, when you think about, is out of logic, because as I have mentioned, in Syria, the majority is not, for example, is not like Gulf countries. The majority are not Saudi Arabians or Sunnis with minority of Shias. Syria has multi-ethnic, Syria has multicultural legacy from more than 10,000 years, and you cannot just stop people to go to church. You cannot stop people from wearing what they would like. You cannot stop people from learning in university subjects that could, for example, be far from some religious people's imaginations or expectations. This is something that could not be in logic if you think logically. But I repeat that this propaganda which they brought forward, they played with the emotions of the people, and they created this euphoria that people after a few years understood that it was a myth. This what was happening in Syria was a myth, but it was all very late, after their houses have been ruined and after their children have been killed, etc., etc.
A wonderful presentation. Thank you so much, Ararat, for this presentation. Uh, Here I'm going to share the screen of mine. So people can able to see so what I'm going to present. Yes, can you able to see the Syria map? That's a very interesting, because then only the audience can able to understand the issues of Syrian crisis and how it turned to war. Because Syria is very, very close to the border of this entire sea. This is the starting point of the Syrian crisis, what I understood.
By the way,
And yes,
I was born in Aleppo, where it's mentioned on the map that you have mentioned.
yes, this one, Aleppo. So you can understand, I'm going to stop sharing the screen. Yes, with the permission from Ararat, that a wonderful presentation. I always prefer to hear the another side story. We have all the information about Syria, the ICs, and how the very human rights issues have been denied from decades, and the women, the children are on very, very crisis. But what was the reason? We don't know that. Thank you so much, Ararat, for this wonderful presentation. So at least people can able to understand different story from the expert, not from the lay person like me. What I understood from a very lay person understanding, I'm from geography background. The geographical implementation of Syria is very important for the West. And that's the reason that power politics and power game have been emerged. That you have rightly pointed out that it was imposed war, imposed crisis that usually being done by the West usually. Thank you so much. First of all, we have some questions in the chat box. So one by one, I'm going to raise the question, and with your discussions, we will go further. The first question is with Firdoz Malik from India. He is a research scholar. Syrian crisis, especially the loss of manpower, innocent killing of women, children, and young people. Why World Organization is silent on this human rights violation?
Pardon me, which organization?
Why World Organization is silent on this human rights violation? World Organization means United Nations, if you mean so, Firdaus.
You mean he is mentioning about UN, yes?
He didn't mention any organizational name, but the World Organization, I believe the United
Yes,
Nations. Yes. Yes, United Nations.
yes. Am I audible?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. The United Nations organization is, the representative body of the whole world, and the vulnerabilities and the, war and the destruction of human life. So they are the key responsible organization. So I am, referring to that very much organization. Thanks very much.
In fact, when you go back to all these years during, if you listen to UN hearings and if you listen to UN National Council meetings, you will see that the Syrian ambassador, the Syrian representative in United Nations have clearly and several times talked about this issue, documented with pictures, with documents, that how these Takfiri, Wahhabi, and Turkish-backed Muslim Brotherhood organizations, the fighters, using chemicals and using bombs that even it's illegal to use in any circumstances. For example, how come you attack district that you know previously that in this district there is no any governmental building, there is no any Syrian forces. They were just attacking, they were just bombing areas that it was full of civilians, but the area was, for example, were full of Armenians and full of Christians. So they have intentionally started to bomb these areas because they thought that they are Salafists, they are Takfirists. So anybody from other races, other ethnicities, even if they are Sunnis or even if they are Shias, but because they don't believe to their Muslim Brotherhood and Salafi Takfiri ideology, they started to bomb innocent people and killed innocent people. Coming back to the question directly, this is, of course, this is a tragedy when double standard Western politics comes to power, and they don't blame, for example, the Saudi regime. They don't blame the Bahraini regime, which for many years they didn't they didn't give the rights for women to drive cars. Just now they started to give some form of rights for women, but nobody blames them. Why? Because they are the allies of United States and the West. So here is why, because the United Nation is under United States influence. That's why, of course, world organizations that you are saying, human rights organizations such as Open Society, for example, which belongs to George Soros, they talk about freedom, gender freedom, and etc., etc. But they never talk about the millions of Iraqi children, millions of Syrian children, millions of Yemeni children under bombs have been killed, but nobody talks about their rights. So I think I answered the question. Here is double standards that what we are seeing in world politics.
Yes, rightly pointed out. Thank you so much, Ararat. You have rightly answered the question. The second question, the new peace deal between UAE and Bahrain and US and others, what will be the role of the peace on this Syrian crisis?
As I have mentioned in my talk, that until even although all these imposed war on Syria was mainly before the war, the French came, the Qataris came to Syria, and there is very interesting book on this. Unfortunately, it's in Arabic, where it's all documented, that it's all explained well, the negotiations between the Syrian president and the Qataris and the French, that if you give up from supporting the Palestine cause, if you give up from this Arab nationalism, if you give up allying with Iran, we will develop your country very quick and you will not have any problem. And again, here it's also double standard when you accuse Syrian government as a Syrian regime, but you go in negotiations with them with giving some how to say some framework working together. But as a Syrian government, until now, all these 10 years of past wars, and now we are under economic sanctions, we of course didn't give up our allies. We of course didn't give up our demand of peaceful relation with Israel only if we can return our Golan Heights, and only if there will be a fair and Palestinian state. So the peace deal which Trump announced before this normalization process, the peace deal was firmly not very fair deal in terms of the Palestinians, because what Americans came and announced under Kushner, under Trump's son-in-law, that the peace deal, they will give big financial support to Palestinians and they will give some freedoms more than they have now. But what Palestinians demand and what they rightful demand is the creation of Palestinian nation. So I believe that as long as there is no Palestinian nation, I believe that this peace deal will be only a show, only a a tool that Trump will have some popular remarks and that will help him for presidential elections. I don't believe that this is very
Another
different.
joke for popularism politics. You are rightly pointed
Yes,
out. Yes, yes.
yes,
So
I
we
don't
have
believe
almost
that
we
this
have
will.
one question left.
Yes,
Connecting with your presentation, very much connecting from Rahul Kumar, sir. The Assad regime has been supported by Russia and Iran's allies. How Syrian government is tackling ISIS means that they have captured oil fields, bombing Aleppo's homes, Idlib's. How to checkmate the growth of the Qutbism-led ideologies?
I didn't hear the last part. The last part.
How to checkmate the growth of Qutbism-led ideologies? Qutbism.
Actually, actually, what I have talked in all this Takfiri and Salafi ideology, the Muslim brother ideology, one of the cornerstones of, one of the godfathers, one of the builders of this ideology, of course, comes from Qutb, because Bin Laden himself, when he was young, and others, of course, from the Muslim Brotherhood, they have been influenced strongly from Qutb's writing and from Qutb's ideologies. But I'm not sure that Qutb was, when he was writing his views and his books, I'm not sure that he knew that after his area, after his death, something like something abnormal and something out of humans' mind will come, people that will just cut people's heads and take the hearts out of the person's body and eat the heart. You know, this is something that I don't believe any normal human being and any ideologue can think about. But I understand Qutb's era, there was two dangers in Egypt. One was the British influence, and the second, of course, was the Arab nationalism that started to grow. So what could that time in his era saw that he started to bring this Islamic awakening to defend Egypt's religious role from Arab nationalism and secular Arab nationalist movement, and at the same time on the other side from Western values in Egypt's social life. But all the way through, from Bin Laden to Baghdadi to Jolani, these people, they have started to create military militias which can kill and bomb people under the name of religion. This has nothing to do with Islam, you know, and they are the first people now who brought down the name of Islam, because Islam is a religion of peace. Islam is not a religion of fighting, and jihad is another way that you can do it with ijtihad. I mean, you can improve yourself by reading the religious book, reading Quran, and by living your life religiously. There is nothing wrong with this. There is nothing wrong with Islam. There is nothing wrong with Christianity. There is nothing wrong with Buddhism. If you compare, bring all these religions together, what religion says to live a normal life, not to make wrong things, and to live with God, to pray to God, to be with God. But these people, they brought down the name of Islam, and everybody started to, in the West, especially in US and elsewhere now, everybody thinks that Islam is a religion that that makes propaganda of terror. So I believe that these people are the first enemies of Islam.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this wonderful ending note for the webinar today. That's the motto of the web platform for dialogue. That first of all, it's my personal gratitude for this wonderful informative session, because we hardly know the opposite side story on the Syrian crisis, particularly because I am really excited for your presentation, because I was really willing to hear someone from the Syria, someone from the other parts of the world to discuss about this very important and very informative session, particularly. And it's not the ending, it's the starting of the discussion, because we really want more and more information on this. Because what happened when this crisis and this ISIS and Islamophobic things have been happening all over the world? They have, you know, they have the information from the West, particularly. We don't have any kind of information from the part where the problem is being emerged. So it's very important to know from the person, from the mouth of the horse. So that's the issue. Thank you so much, Ararat, for this session. And
My pleasure.
without any kind of judgmental comment, terrorism is now connected with Islam. It's a story actually, but we need to know that how it been connected. So we need to find out the starting point of terrorism and how it been emerged. Not all the Islam or who are been practicing Islam are not terrorists, but it is obvious that some of them are terrorists. So I think that's, you can understand my point of concern. And that's why if a rotten apple is enough to create the rotten things for the entire bucket. So that's the takeaway from your presentation, that we need to know the root causes first of all, that how it been emerged and what were the main causes of this crisis. Then only we can able to understand the ISIS issues, the terrorism, and how it been uh, flourished, not only in your Syria or your part, but to the entire world. Even in India also we can hear some of the news of ISIS. So it's kind of a terror each and every day we are having right now. Thank you so much, first of all, and we will continue our journey with this kind of sessions from you. And I am really thankful to all the audience, and thankful to Dr. Kajal, who joined very late, but actually she asked personally in the my messenger that she would like to join your session. So thank you so much, Dr. Kajal, for your uh, willingness to join the session. We are almost at the end of the discussion, so take care, all of you. Yes, Dr. Kajal, would you like to say something?
I was getting interested because I saw the link. I just saw it in Facebook, so I thought let me join in and see what's there to end. End part is also not the least. It was quite fruitful for me. A little bit is enough to know
Thank
the whole
you.
gist,
Thank you.
and it's recorded.
Thanks
So I
to,
hope
yes.
yeah, I'll be able to see the rest
Please,
part of it
please do.
also.
Yes.
And
It was
thank you,
really
sir, for
wonderful to hear you. Thank you for joining.
yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you, Kamal.
And
Thank you. Thank you for your observation and pointing out. It's a different story. But Kamal, I would really like to have your comment on this, because you are from Iraq. What would be your observation? It's not necessary the similar thing. It's not necessary you will support. Maybe you're against with Ararat, but that is also very important. Please, Kamal, share your views.
Well, thank you very much for sharing these interesting points. Actually, I worked directly with the Syrian refugees in Iraq, which I witnessed the only thing that I can tell that they were really struggling with their life economically, humanly, with different kinds of suffering. That first of all, there was a big number of them suffering with education because they didn't have their IDs that will permit them to get education in Syria. So I was working in a literacy program, just offering education to those people. So maybe I'm from the other side. I saw and witnessed the human suffering, which I care mainly about. And I think we all need to focus about the human suffering and how we can participate in putting an end or at least in decreasing this big suffering. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kamil, for your input. Ararat, would you like to comment, or else you can connect with each other for more in-depth study? Because I think you are also thinking for some kind of think tank from all over the world to do some collaborative work. So here I'm going to end the session, not to say goodbye, because we will definitely see you soon, very soon. And evening, good night, whatever time zone you are in. So take care, all of you.
Thank you very much.